Sometimes life hands you a situation so unpleasant that your options are basically accept it or fight the universe like it has personally insulted your mother. I've tried both, and only one works long term. Welcome back to Friendless, sweet peas. I'm your host, James Evermenko, and this is episode 4 of our DBT micro season, Distress Tolerance Part 2. Now, last episode, we talked about stop and TIPP, the emergency brake and the biological reset. Those are the skills for acute crisis moments. When, you're about to act on impulse, when your nervous system is at a 10 and you need to come down fast. This episode is going to be different. This episode is the slow burn, the ongoing pains of life, the situations you can't fix right now and just have to live with anyway, the grief that doesn't resolve in a week, the circumstances that you didn't choose and can't change. It's the reality that just keeps being what it is, regardless of how much you resist it. Stop and TIPP are for the tornado. Today's skills are for the aftermath. It's when the tornado's passed and you're standing in what it left behind and you have to figure out, how to be in that. So 2 major skills today: self-soothing, which is, about gentleness, about giving your nervous system what it needs to be a little safer. And then radical acceptance, which is probably the hardest skill in all of DBT. And at least in my experience, it is also the most transformative. I want to talk about something I think most of us do almost constantly without even realizing it. We fight reality. Not in, big dramatic ways necessarily. Sometimes it's quiet. It's that low-grade hum of resistance to just how things are. It's that ongoing argument about circumstances we can't change. This shouldn't be happening that plays in a loop underneath everything else. And that, is a surefire way to exhaust yourself. It's exhausting in a way that is hard to measure because it just sort of becomes background noise to your life and it drains you. It takes up these enormous amounts of energy that you could be using to actually deal with your situation, to adapt, to respond. Instead of it going towards something useful, it's going into this constant fight against what is. Let me tell you about a time that I did this. So we'll go with a doozy. When I got divorced, I had a monumentally difficult time coming to grips with it actually happening. And I don't just mean I was sad or struggling to adjust. I mean, there were times where I refused to accept that it was happening. Like on a fundamental level, I couldn't let reality be real. I thought, if I just tried harder, if I just showed how much I wanted to save the relationship, that things would come around. I put on this Olympic level mental gymnastics routine to just end up prostrating myself and to prove, why we should have stayed together. Because I was terrified of change. I was petrified. And so rather than facing that, I just refused to see the reality that, I was miserable. I was being gaslit into believing that I was the cause of this relationship breakdown. I had stopped trusting myself. I had stopped believing in my own eyes, my own grip on reality. By the end of it, I had gotten so used to being accused of doing things that I wasn't doing that I genuinely started thinking, well, maybe I had done them and just somehow blocked it out. Maybe I had cheated. Maybe I had been the one to cause all this. Maybe everything I thought I knew about myself and the relationship was completely wrong. And I was stuck in this pit of misery for months, fighting reality every single day, telling myself this shouldn't be happening. And, if I just fix myself enough, this will stop. And, my favorite was, I must be the problem because that's what I keep being told. Right. And fighting that reality cost me everything. It cost me my energy. It cost me my rest, my sense of self, my ability to trust my own perceptions. Relationships with people crumbled because I wouldn't let them through. And then one day I got an email from a woman who was the wife of the man that my ex had been cheating on me with for what was at least the last year of our relationship. And in reading that, the irony was she'd written me asking me, how do I feel about this? And I had to write back and say, well, ma'am, I'll let you know when I know because you're the one telling me about it. But in reading that email, it was like all of reality just sort of shifted into a new place. It genuinely felt like seeing the code in the Matrix. Suddenly I could see why I thought what I thought. It was because of what had been withheld from me. I could see the shape of the gaslighting. I could see which parts of the breakdown of the relationship were actually about me and which parts had literally nothing to do with me at all. And that helped me accept what was happening. And when I could accept what had really happened, when I had the information that I needed to see reality clearly, I could then begin to accept that this was the new reality of my life. And it really felt like this massive release of pressure, like this boulder had been lifted off my shoulders. Obviously I was still in pain. It didn't change that I hurt, but it changed how I hurt. Because I wasn't fighting reality anymore. I wasn't, punching the ocean. I was just in pain. And somehow being in pain without the layer of this shouldn't be happening or I must have caused this, that became survivable in a way that the fight hadn't been. And this is what DBT calls punching the ocean. The ocean doesn't care. The ocean doesn't change. The ocean just keeps being the ocean. But you're exhausting yourself at every wave. So DBT makes a distinction here that I find actually really, really clarifying. It's the idea of this distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is the actual hard thing. It's the thing that happened, the situation you're in, the grief, the loss, the limitation, the reality. That's pain. And frustratingly, pain is unavoidable. Life contains pain. That's just true. Suffering is the extra layer we add by fighting the pain. This shouldn't be happening. I can't accept this. The resistance to what is. That's suffering. And suffering, unlike pain, is something we can actually do something about. And radical acceptance is the tool for reducing the suffering part. Not the pain, but the suffering. There's the idea of there's two directions you can go. You can resist it and remain within the world of suffering, or you can choose to accept it and still be in pain, but release the suffering. That's sort of how it was visualized for me. So let's talk about what this actually is. Before we get to radical acceptance, I want to talk first about self-soothing, because I think it's really helpful to sort of always begin with softness. I think you need gentleness before you can receive hard truths. It's that idea of we should always be working on staying soft, not hardening up. So self-soothing in a lot of ways is one of the simplest skills in all of DBT. It's about comforting your nervous system through your senses. And it's exactly as basic as it sounds. But the baseline of it is when you're in distress, real ongoing distress, your nervous system needs to feel safe. And sometimes the fastest way to put safety signals in, it isn't through your thoughts, it's through your body. So through sensory input, that tells your nervous system we're okay. So we've got 5 senses, right? Other than Haley Joel Osment um, but here's what self-soothing looks like through each sense. Touch, we're thinking of things like a soft blanket, a warm shower, lotion on your hands, a weighted blanket, petting your cat or your dog or your hamster or your chinchilla or whatever it is. Anything that just gives your body something gentle to feel and to really tactilely hold on to. Sight, these can be things like a candlelight, a photo that brings you comfort, a clean corner of your space, maybe something green like plants or trees outside your window, a park. Our eyes are constantly taking in information, and giving it some kind of calming visual input is going to tell your nervous system that something other than chaos exists out there. Smell is probably one of the most direct routes to the nervous system. Certain smells trigger memory, especially of safety, in a very immediate way. So again, a candle, coffee, fresh air, clean laundry, something that smells like, your home, or just whatever safety means to you. Maybe it's something that associates with a very specific moment that you connect with being safe. Taste can be tea, it can be warm or cold. It can be chocolate, crunchy. Crunchy can help with jaw tension. Sour can be really grounding. I use sour. Comfort foods, obviously, there's no judgment on what comfort food is for you. In these moments, this is not about nutrition. This is just about what's getting your nervous system safe. Just comfort. Sound can be rain sounds, can be music that music that you actually like. Not music that you think you should find calming, but music that actually comforts you. It can be a familiar podcast. It can be silence. If silence feels good. Sometimes silence is really, really scary. And silence can be quite overwhelming because there is so much unnoticed background noise in our day-to-day lives. So sometimes silence can actually be quite abrupt and alarming. So play with that, as your personal needs dictate. This is why things like maybe a fan on low or a white noise, whether it's a white noise app or a white noise machine, something like that. But I want to remind you that self-soothing is not avoidance. It's not numbing yourself. It's not trying to make the feeling go away by distracting yourself until they pass. It's about giving your nervous system the sensory input it needs to regulate while you're in pain. You're not leaving the pain. You're just not white knuckling through it alone. I actually built a little self-soothing kit during my DBT group. It's this little bag that I carry with me everywhere I go, and it's got all my little go-to self-soothing tools. So I have a peppermint halo roller. It's one of the roller things, you put on your temples and your wrists. The smell just really helps kind of snap me into place. Peppermint, at least for me, is, it's sharp enough to kind of cut through brain fog, but it's not so overwhelming that it kind of adds to the sensory chaos. Sometimes some of the scents can be too much, and it actually just compounds the panic. I have a couple sour hard candies. They kind of sting my mouth a little bit. I use those to kind of jolt my senses. It's both taste, but it's also just a little bit of controlled discomfort, and that really helps bring me back into my body. I have a little box of all my prescriptions, just a few backups, plus a couple Advils. Because sometimes, honestly, self-soothing is just ibuprofen and a water. Right? I keep a spare pair of loops. If anybody needs a sign to buy a pair of loops, this is your sign. I cannot speak highly enough about them. I have several pairs. Even though I keep literally a pair on my keychain, another by my bed, another in my bag. I also have a spare in my soothing kit because, it's always good to have backups. Plus they're little. I lose them all the time. But loops, their main function is they just help kind of mute the outside world a little bit. They don't completely cut off sound, but they just sort of take the edge off, and they make all the sound in the world just a little less sharp, for me at least. And that really helps to kind of take that edge off. So personally, I built this kit through trial and error, through suggestions from friends, experimenting with things people had mentioned in my DBT group. Not everything stuck. There are people who use spiky hard things. There are people who use soft. There are people who hold. There, all kinds of different things. So not everything stuck, but the things that did, these are the tools that help me. These tools help slow me down. They help me kind of get back in my body, get me back to thinking in the moment instead of just being fully hijacked by that, whatever the feeling is in the moment. And, in a way, it can be kind of embarrassing to have like my little Minty Bee kit, right? Like, hey, here's my emergency mental health survival bag, but at this point, I really just don't care. Honestly, it's a really cute little bag that I picked up from Muji, and all the tools help me on an almost daily basis. And then also, they end up actually acting kind of like an emergency resource for friends while we're out, and I never want you to underestimate the connective power of being the friend who has the Advil when it's needed. So if you're building your own self-soothing menu, start small. Try things, try suggestions, try a few of the ones I've suggested, maybe do a little Google, and only keep what works. Don't feel like, well, James said peppermint works, so it has to work for me. If it doesn't, who cares? Try something else, right? Try a different smell, try a different sense altogether, right? And just remember, don't feel weird about carrying it with you. Your nervous system doesn't care if it looks silly. It cares if it works. So as I said, the number one thing I want to encourage you to do if you're going to start, a menu or a kit or whatever for yourself, start really, really small and sort of create almost like options across different time windows. Maybe something that takes under a minute so that when you're in the middle of a really bad moment and you just need something fast, you have that something and you're not scrambling. Then maybe it's like something that takes like 5 to 10 minutes. I have a nail file. I personally really like that sensation, and that can take a little bit longer. Or it might be something like, it might not be in your kit. It might be, the ritual of making a cup of tea. Maybe it's about taking a shower. Maybe it's about stepping outside or sitting on a bench, something that takes a little bit longer. And then another thing could be, after the 5 to 10, maybe it's like a 20 to 30, maybe it's taking a long bath or watching a full comfort show or like a yoga session, gentle movement. Again, whatever it looks like for you, right? The point is about having options, because, when you're already dysregulated, the last thing you want to do is to have to think really hard about what might help, right? So just having that menu, having that kit means that you can just reach for it and go, and you don't have to think. Okay. Radical acceptance. Here we go. This is the skill everyone hates until it saves their lives. So here's what radical acceptance is. It means accepting reality as it is, fully, completely, without fighting it, without wishing it were different, and without adding the layer of this shouldn't be happening. And I know, I get it. Your first reaction is probably the same one I had, which is probably resistance. Because when you first hear it, for me, it sounds like, well, just accept the bad thing. Just be okay with something being unfair. Just give up on it getting better. And that's not what this means. I want to be really, really clear about this, because I think the misunderstanding of radical acceptance is what makes so many people reject it before they ever even try. Radical acceptance is not approval. It's not saying the situation is okay or fair or what you wanted. It's not saying you agree with it. It's not saying you're going to stop working towards something different. It's just saying this is what's happening right now. Not what should be happening, not what's fair, not what you wish were true. What is actually currently right now happening? That is the only statement radical acceptance is making. And when you stop fighting what is, something shifts. Not the situation. The situation might be exactly as hard as it was before. But the energy you were pouring into resistance, that comes back. And you can now use that for something else, like maybe actually dealing with the situation. So, okay, I'll give you a couple examples of what acceptance is and is not. You didn't choose to be on medical leave. That's the reality. Fighting that reality sounds like I should be able to work, other people manage, what's wrong with me, I need to push through this. Accepting that reality sounds like I'm on medical leave right now. This is what's happening. I can make decisions based on this reality. Nothing about the second version says this is good, or I'm happy about this, or I've given up on going back. It just says this is real, and I'm going to work with what's real. Someone you love is struggling and you can't fix it. Fighting that sounds like I should be able to help. Why can't I make this better? I'm failing them. Accepting it sounds like they're struggling and I can't fix it. I can be present, I can show up, but I cannot fix it. The pain is still there. The situation is still hard, but the suffering, that extra layer of I shouldn't be in this situation or I'm failing because I can't fix this, that part comes down. The reality is, for me personally, I have to radically accept something every time I open my phone, right? This is not a one and done and never think about it again. I have to remind myself that I am not the sum of all the anxieties social media is bombarding me with, that the state of the world is not a personal failing of mine. More specifically, I'll give you an example. Over the last few months, I have become a lot more withdrawn than I wanted to. I got into a cycle, kind of hiding from the world without really realizing it, not reaching out to people, sitting on my couch all day and playing video games, not eating well, not sleeping well, and generally just sort of treating my body like garbage. And in my last therapy session, I was saying to my therapist, Scott, I don't understand why I feel like such garbage. And he kind of laughed because he reflected back to me, you don't exercise, you don't go outside enough, you sit around all day and eat garbage. Why could you possibly feel so bad? And he was right. Obviously, but hearing it out loud really, it really was brutal in the moment, but very helpful. And, and we then set out some ideas of how I can change the feeling. But before we could do any of that, I had to first accept that that's where I was. I had to accept that this was my reality. Not the reality I wanted, not the reality I thought I should have, just the reality I was in. And that meant getting rid of the excuses, getting rid of the world's a dumpster fire, so of course I'm struggling, or getting rid of I'm on medical leave, so I'm allowed to do nothing, I had to just look at myself, at what I had actually done to get myself, pushing against my responsibilities to myself and to my friends, not wanting to admit I needed help. Still struggling to admit that. Getting angry at myself for things I logically know I'm not responsible for. Believing that the state of the world is somehow my personal failing. And accepting these things didn't come with exonerating them or exonerating myself. And it came with a massive amount of grief and fear and trepidation. But it also came with joy and relief and excitement and curiosity. Because when I stopped fighting the reality of where I was, I could actually start figuring out what to do about it. And this wasn't a one-time thing. It's not like I accepted it once and now, hey, I'm fixed. I have to continue to accept these things over and over and over. Every time I catch myself slipping back into the patterns, every time I notice I haven't left the house in 3 days, every time I open my phone and I feel the weight of the world on my shoulders, I have to turn towards that acceptance again and again in order to continue to show up the way I want to. That's the practice. As I keep saying, it's not about perfection. It's just about returning to acceptance over and over and over. And that's the thing about radical acceptance, that nobody tells you up front, that it's not a one-time decision. You don't accept something once and then you're done. You accept it, and then life does something to remind you of, and you resist again. And then you catch yourself resisting and you accept it again, over and over and over. And that's the practice. That's what it looks like long-term. Not some permanent state of Zen acceptance where you never fight reality again, just catching yourself sooner each time and returning to acceptance a little bit faster each time. And over time, the gap between I'm fighting this to, whoop, I'm fighting this again, I need to accept it, that gap gets smaller. And that's the whole win. The other piece that I want to slip in at the end here is the idea that if you're in a situation that you want to change, if you observe something in your life, in the life of your community, in the wherever it might be, and you want it to change, you have to first accept what is, because nothing can change until you first accept where it is. In a lot of ways, it's the same baseline as meeting people where they are. You can't just show up and tell people the way it is. You have to first show up and understand where it currently is. So until you can accept the reality as it is, you cannot change that reality into something that's more in line with what you want. Let's do a quick practice. We'll start with self-soothing, then we'll move to acceptance. So right now, wherever you are, find one thing that engages one of your senses in a gentle way. Maybe it's the feeling of wherever you're sitting, the texture of the chair or the couch, the temperature of the air. Maybe it's a sound in the background, something ambient. Just let it be there. Maybe it's the feeling of your hands, the warmth. Just notice it. Let it be there with you. That's self-soothing. You don't need a special setting. You don't need to set anything up. You just need one gentle sensory input, one signal to your nervous system that you're safe right now. Now, acceptance. Think about something in your life that you've been resisting. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing. In fact, it shouldn't be. Just a little something that you've been pushing against. Something you can't change right now. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to like it. Just say silently or out loud if that feels right. This is what's happening right now. Now notice what comes up. Maybe resistance. Maybe sadness. Maybe a small exhale of relief. Maybe nothing. And all of that is okay. You don't have to accept it perfectly. You just have to practice. And that's it. 2 questions to sit with this week if you want them. First, for self-soothing, what's one small act of comfort you could add to your crisis plan? Not a big thing, just something quick, something that engages your senses, something that signals to your nervous system, we're okay right now. And second, for radical acceptance, what's one thing you cannot change today? Just one. And what would accepting it, not liking it, not approving of it, just accepting that it's real, What would that look like for you? Don't answer either of these right now. Just let them sit. And that is distress tolerance part 2. Self-soothing, gentleness for your nervous system when things are hard, giving yourself the sensory comfort your body needs to feel a little safer, and radical acceptance, or as I've been calling it, gnarly acceptance. Bodacious acceptance. Bossa Nova acceptance. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was raised on the Ninja Turtles. Where was I? Radical. Not giving up, not approving, not pretending, just releasing the fight against what is and letting that freed up energy go somewhere useful. Neither of these are easy. Self-soothing can feel self-indulgent when you're used to just kind of powering through. And radical acceptance can feel like defeat when you're used to fighting for whatever circumstance you're used to. But they're not any of those things. They're just skills. And like all skills, they will get easier with practice. Next episode, we're going to be moving into a completely different module. We're leaving the distress territory and we're entering emotional regulation. It's going to be all about understanding why your emotions do what they do and what you can do to work with them instead of against them. If you have any questions for me, any follow-up stories about any of the skills, any details you wanted to share with me or that I could share in a future episode, please email me at friendlesspod@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. I've been having an absolute blast making this season. I would love to hear how it has all been landing for you. So please do email me. You can also message me on social media. I'm mostly on Instagram these days at friendlesspod. You can also find me on TikTok at friendlesspod. But that's going to be it for me this week. So we'll wrap things up there. Thank you one more time. I hope to see you back here next week with another episode. But as always, I'm not going to worry about that right now. And neither should you, because that is then and this is now. So for now, I'll just say I love you and I wish you well. Fun and safety, sweet peas.